Who is Prometheus? The myth of Prometheus is peculiar insofar as it is the most inexhaustibly meaningful and far-reaching myth in the entire history of mankind. And yet it has been rendered somewhat obscure by comparison to certain other myths. This has probably been by design, because the tremendous meaning of the myth of Prometheus is incomparably more dangerous to established interests than any other tale with archetypal power. The parasitic elite wants you to forget about Prometheus, that despite the fact that he is the creator, civilizer, and liberator of mankind. Prometheus is a Titan. He is the son of the Titans Iapetus and Themis. It is noteworthy in this regard that Themis is herself the daughter of Uranus and Gaia, or heaven and earth, and she is the creator of the oracle at Delphi, which she later gives to Apollo. This is relevant to the power of prophecy that is part of the forethought of Prometheus, the quality that defined his name and to which we will return. The Titans were a class of divine beings who ruled before the Olympians until they lost a great battle against these new gods. That cosmic war is referred to as the Titanomachia, or Clash of the Titans with the gods. We find a version of this war in all of the Indo-European cultures. In India, it is the war between the Devas and the Asuras, with the Asuras being Titans. In the Iranian version, there is an inversion, wherein the Titans or Ahuras are valorized. In archaic Iran, the most important of these Ahuras is Mithra, and later, in the teachings of Zarathustra, circa 600 BC, the name of the most important Iranian deity becomes Ahura Mazda, or the Titan of Wisdom, and he is associated with an ever-burning fire. Moreover, there is a myth according to which the founder of the Order of the Magi stole cosmic fire from heaven and established its hearth on earth, with the Magi as its guardians. Prometheus came to prominence as a tragic hero in Greek culture in the 6th century BC, particularly in the Prometheus trilogy of Aeschylus, after the integration of much of Greece into the Persian Empire. Before that, as in the Theogony and Works and Days of the paternalistic authoritarian bard Hesiod, Prometheus was a cautionary tale warning against defying the divine authority of Zeus and the perennial power of tradition. As we shall see, there are strong Iranian influences on the symbols of this myth. To begin with, the imagery of Prometheus waging war against Kronos, the chief of the Titans and the lord of time, has an older precedent in the struggle of Mithra to overpower Zorvan, Kronos, by surmounting the earth and grabbing hold of the wheelwork of the celestial sphere so as to free humanity from fatalistic planetary and zodiacal influences. The skull and crossed bones, which was first flown by the Cilician pirates who were devotees of Mithra, was a symbol of overcoming the realm of time and death, with the skull being the head of the defeated Zorvan, Kronos, and the bones crossed at 23 degrees, symbolizing the intersection of the plane of the zodiac with the celestial equator, suggesting the power of Mithra to move the stars. Prometheus is the archetypal pirate. The Titans reject his suggestions of complex stratagems, and with his unmatched power of forethought, he foresees that they will be defeated by the gods on account of a foolish decision to fight by brute force. So he decides to side with the gods, by offering strategic advice to Zeus and helping him to become enthroned on Olympus. Like the angel Lucifer, before he becomes Satan and is banished from heaven for opposing the Lord Jehovah, Prometheus starts off as God's right-hand man, or perhaps left-hand man would be more appropriate, as in the left-hand path. Meanwhile, the other defeated Titans are bound beneath the earth in Tartarus, a subterranean realm that later, together with Hades and the Neptunian realm of Poseidon, served as a template for the Christian image of hell. This included one of the brothers of Prometheus, Menoetius, whose name means doomed might. He is important because as the Titan of hubris, or exceeding pridefulness, and of violent anger and rash action, he symbolizes the shadow, or dark side, of Prometheus, that is later integrated into the image of Satan. The second brother of Prometheus, namely Atlas, has a special punishment reserved for him. As the strongest of the Titans and the general who led them all in the Titanomachia, instead of being bound in Tartarus, Zeus condemns him to separate heaven and earth from one another by bearing the weight of the celestial sphere on his own shoulders. We will come back to the relevance of this to the meaning of the Prometheus myth. The third brother of Prometheus, namely Epimetheus, or Afterthought, escapes the wrath of Zeus because he joins Prometheus in siding with the Olympians. In fact, Epimetheus is entrusted with a very special task. As Plato recounts in his dialogue Protagoras, when Zeus rewards Prometheus for his loyalty by allowing the Titan to craft the new race of mankind out of clay, as one of a number of species that are created on Earth at this time, Epimetheus is afforded the opportunity to help his brother in this monumental task, as a kind of subcontractor. However, Epimetheus, whose name means afterthought, is a bit of a bumbling idiot and a forgetful fool who acts before he thinks and only realizes things in hindsight, as compared to the defining foresight of Prometheus. So when he gives fur to certain animals to keep them warm in the cold, and claws to other animals to defend themselves, and huge sharp teeth to certain predators to feed on other animals to nourish themselves, and speed to yet others so that they can escape with their lives when confronted by a predator, Epimetheus forgets to endow the men molded out of clay by his brother Prometheus with an essence or capacities that are unique to them and that would let them fend for themselves amidst nature's savagery. Prometheus remedies this in two ways, and they are both terribly significant. Firstly, he enlists the aid of Athena, who gives the gift of a soul to mankind in the form of a butterfly. The butterfly is a symbol of metamorphosis, transformation, and freedom. Athena helps Prometheus because it is Prometheus who had used an axe to slice through the close-knit, Pikinos, mind of Zeus in order to deliver Athena from out of his brain. She is birthed from out of his skull. As the goddess of wisdom and war, in other words, of the inextricability of warfare from the pursuit of wisdom, the symbolism of Athena is also relevant to the meaning of the Prometheus myth, since Prometheus is the one who midwifed her into the world. Secondly, and more famously, Prometheus remedies the forgetfulness of Epimetheus by breaking into the workshop of Hephaestus, the crafts god, on Olympus, and stealing the fire of the forge in a fennel-stalk torch, racing back to mankind as a thief on the run, and gifting mortals with this stolen fire as a means to mighty ends. Not only does this fire symbolize techne or craft, Prometheus acts as a teacher in every art, a civilizer who reveals to us knowledge of all of the arts and sciences and how to use fire for every manner of invention and innovation. There are a number of very important interpretive points here. Firstly, the fact that at our creation we are left without any essence or nature of the kind that defines all of the other animals means that our existence precedes our essence. In other words, there is no such thing as human nature, let alone a God-given human nature. We were not created by God, but by titans with the qualities of Promethea and Epimethea, or forethought, foresight, and afterthought, hindsight, both of which are reflected in our behavior. The fact that our lack of essence is remedied only by the gifts of a butterfly for a soul and the fire of techne, craft, from which we get the word technology, means that our very existence is defined only by the power of undergoing metamorphosis and to transform ourselves like a caterpillar into a butterfly by means of the power of the arts and sciences, including every form of technology. This is tremendously liberating. And in this connection, it is important to note that the Statue of Liberty in New York Harbor was designed by Bartholdi to be a representative of Mithra in the second grade of initiation, that of the nymph, wherein the initiate becomes a transvestite. And insofar as Prometheus is a Greek version of Mithra, the torch being defiantly borne aloft by Lady Liberty is also intended to evoke the fire stolen by Prometheus. The theft of the fire from Olympus in the form of a fennel torch is the basis for the ceremony of the torch race in ancient Athens, which Plato uses as the opening imagery of his ultra-Promethean treatise, Republic, and which becomes the inspiration for the ceremony of the torch in the Olympic Games. There was a fire altar to Prometheus in Plato's academy, and people would light torches in its flames to carry them down into the city of Athens. That Prometheus became the civilizer deity who taught all of the arts and sciences that eventually became enshrined in the academy draws a parallel to the story of the fallen angels in Genesis 6 and in the book of Enoch that was excerpted from out of this part of the Bible. As these biblical books tell us, these rogue angels under the leadership of Satan, who leads a rebellion of a couple of hundred of them against God, came down and gave mankind the gift of sciences and technologies that had been hidden from them by God and the obedient angels. Both the Prometheus myth and the biblical parallel are probably based on the older Sumerian tale of Enki, the benevolent creator of mankind who opposes his tyrannical brother Enlil, a storm god like Jehovah, who wants to keep mankind as a slave race living in enforced ignorance. Enki, as a proto-Prometheus, brings 7 sages with him on a mission to teach humans all of the arts and sciences that would afford them the potential for determining their own destiny. The theft of fire was only the first of the cunning machinations that earned Prometheus the epithet of being a trickster. The second occurred when Zeus came to Prometheus to demand that he determine a form of sacrifice for his creatures to offer up to the Olympian gods as a sign of their subservience. Prometheus tricked Zeus badly. He prepared 2 bowls, one with marbled fat covering only the white bones of a sacrificed animal, another with the lean meat of the ox stuffed into the displeasing-looking skin of the ox's stomach. Zeus chose the former as the prototype of sacrifice and was enraged to discover that only bones were beneath the alluring and deceptive layer of fat. Thereby Prometheus secured the most nourishing part of the animal for mankind. What this element of the myth really means is that, as in the case of the theft of fire as a means to human enlightenment and self-determination, Prometheus was very intent on giving men the ability to irreverently defy the gods and to live for themselves. Of course, Zeus couldn't have this. He retaliated by sending a beautiful woman to Epimetheus, the original honeypot as it were, bearing a jar or box that the woman herself was told never to open. Each of the Olympian gods and goddesses had put some kind of ill or misfortune into this box, from war and pestilence to drought and starvation and so forth. The woman bearing the gift was named Pandora, meaning all gifts. Most interestingly, it is said that she was the first woman among the race of men created by Prometheus. In other words, the first men were sexually undifferentiated. If one sets this myth into the context of another Greek myth about sexual differentiation, which we see Plato reference in his dialogue Symposium, they were not, strictly speaking, a race of males, but an androgynous race or a species of hermaphrodites. Thus, the arrival of Pandora represents sexual differentiation and suggests that many dangers and miseries are attendant to this loss of sexual wholeness in each individual. In any case, despite his having been told by Prometheus not to accept any gifts from Zeus, the forgetful fool Epimetheus is stunned by Pandora's beauty and accepts her as his wife. For her part, Pandora cannot resist the curiosity of looking into the jar or box. When Pandora's box is opened, every miserable ill and misfortune escapes out into the world of mankind, including everything attendant to sex, lustful passion, tragic romance, matrimonial strife, and so forth. All that remains in the box is elpis, or hope, in the sense of desperate faith that things can be other than they are. So the aspiration for utopia in the midst of a perceived dystopia is also part of the myth of Prometheus. In fact, this aspiration for utopia has a lot to do with the next act of vengeance that we see from Zeus. Despite his intention to make life impossible for mankind, by means of Pandora's box, and through the strife attendant to the division of the race into men and women, the creatures of Prometheus somehow managed to build an ocean-going civilization with very high technology that is on the brink of unifying the whole world under the banner of rebellion against Olympus. What is more, the sovereign of this civilization, a son of Poseidon, who becomes in his own way an adversary of Zeus, is named after the brother of Prometheus, the Titan Atlas. This links back to Atlas as the one who bears the heavens on his own shoulders, and whose name consequently comes to refer to the star charts, ocean navigation maps, and other atlases, such as even medical atlases, that are part and parcel of mapping out human knowledge and opening up new horizons for intrepid exploration. This is why Plato's story of Atlantis in Critias immediately follows his description of the Atlas-like demiurge in Timaeus. Atlantis, or the realm of King Atlas, corresponds to the pre-flood civilization of Genesis, populated by hybrids produced from the mating of mortal women with the rebel angels who had come down to teach humans all of the arts and sciences that were meanly hidden from them by God in heaven. Except that the biblical version has been badly distorted to make it appear as if the same God who brings the worldwide flood to punish the putative hubris of this race of rebellious mortals is the God who sends Noah to build an ark to save certain men and animals from the deluge. The original version, related in the myth of Prometheus, makes much more sense. It is the son of Prometheus, Deucalion, who tries to save what humans he can from the jealous and sadistically controlling Zeus, who is intent on destroying humanity by means of the deluge, because if humans will not serve him, then they are better off being exterminated altogether. Deucalion succeeds in preserving human life and, like his father, becomes a civilizer who helps to restore high culture. What is worse, from the perspective of Zeus, is that Prometheus, with his foresight, harbors the secret of who is going to overthrow him and take his place as a more just and humanitarian ruler on Olympus. Zeus is intent on prying this secret from out of the mind of Prometheus, so he has Prometheus arrested and bound by Kratos and Bia, or power and violence. This symbolism makes clear the character of the sovereign authority of Zeus. It is the tyranny of brute force, precisely what Prometheus was trying to bring to an end when he had first sided with Zeus in order to overthrow Kronos, the Lord of Time, whose absolute identification with fate was even more oppressive. Prometheus is bound by chains to a rock in the Caucasus Mountains, where the eagle of Zeus keeps tearing at and feeding on his liver, which regrows every night so that the titanic trickster can endure the same torture again the next day. The archaic Greeks used the black glossy liver by candlelight for fortune-telling or seeing the future, akin to the crystal ball gazing of other psychics. So this is a symbol of Zeus attempting to see what Prometheus already sees and knows. Zeus also keeps sending Hermes as an emissary to Prometheus in order to try to convince him to give up the secret. This is interesting because Hermes is supposedly the trickster of the Olympian pantheon, but when Prometheus is bound, Hermes acts as a dutiful representative of the authority of Zeus. Those Hermetic mystics who like to see Hermes as a trickster would do well to remember this and to recognize that Prometheus is the original trickster of the West. While Prometheus is bound, he is visited by Io, a princess who Zeus lusted after and who, when she refused to give in to him out of fear of what Hera, the wife of Zeus, would do to her out of jealous rage, was turned into a cow by Zeus. Despite his own horrendous suffering, Prometheus is able to empathize with Io and to console her, with their conversations serving to remind us of what a sadist Zeus is and how he visits the most horrendous misfortunes even on defenseless women who are as innocent as Io. This scene is also important because it is another point at which the myth of Prometheus connects back to a probable Iranian inspiration, or at least an Iranian parallel. The Gathas of Zarathustra, Zoroaster. His philosophical hymns begin with a scene of the cow pleading in a feminine voice for a just protector from the wrath of the Devas, the gods, and being answered by the Titan of Wisdom, quote unquote, Ahura Mazda, who appoints Zarathustra as her protector and the prophet tasked with enlightening mankind. Prometheus reassures Io that Zeus will eventually be overthrown. What he refuses to reveal to Zeus, despite the torture at the hands of the eagle or the inquisitorial questioning by Hermes, is that Thetis is among the women that Zeus will rape in the future, serial rapist that he is. This would make Zeus the father of Achilles, the infamous hero or anti-hero of the Trojan War. As memorialized in Homer's Iliad, Achilles is the son of Thetis by the human father Peleus. This is not how it was supposed to be. Zeus somehow found out what Prometheus was refusing to tell him, and he refrained from raping Thetis so that Achilles would not be born as a hero, in the true sense of being a hybrid or demigod. Had he been born as such, he would have been destined to overthrow Zeus. We can see this from the character that Achilles displays in the Iliad. In his prideful refusal to bow to Agamemnon, who he considers a capriciously unjust king and commander, and in his relentless rage and wrathful persistence in disobedience, Achilles is the first figure in Greek literature or poetry to demonstrate a profound questioning of hitherto unquestioned norms that unconsciously equate the fact of the matter of how things are with how they ought to be. Before Achilles, the social order was not conceived of as separate from the natural order, and this state of affairs, unconsciously governed by ancestral custom, was assumed to be a just expression of the divine will and the allotted fate of mankind. Achilles calls all of this into question, framing his perceived injustice in terms of a projected vision of an ideal order that would be more just than the world as it is. Moreover, he is willing to face the wrath of the gods and to let his own men be slaughtered by digging his heels in to pridefully stand against this injustice and to stand for his sovereign individuality until it sets an example that might inspire others to join this lonely insurrection. It makes perfect sense that this is the soul that Prometheus foresees as the type of person who would and could overthrow Zeus, that is, if he were to have been born as a demigod with the abilities to do so. Still, what this part of the myth tells us is that in principle Zeus can and should be overthrown. This is something that we should hope for and aim to achieve. The flames of this hope are fanned by the fact that Prometheus is eventually freed from his torment. In the course of his own heroic adventures, the strong man of unmatched might, Hercules, or Heracles, happens upon Prometheus in the Caucasus Mountains. The location is not insignificant insofar as the forethought of Prometheus is connected to the thinking ahead that is demanded of people who live in parts of the world with long winters. This seasonal preparation among the original Caucasians and the various Indo-Europeans, Aryans, who descended from them, has a lot to do with the predominance of techne and eventually of technological science among these peoples. One does not find this among natives of parts of the world that lack seasons. According to some versions, Prometheus was specifically chained to the peak of Mount Elbrus, after which the Iranians, or Aryans, later named the Alborz mountain chain once they migrated from the Caucasus to the land that they named Aryana, or Iran, after themselves. The Iranian connection is very important here because the Ossetians of Georgia, who are the last remnant of the Scythian branch of northern Iranians, have preserved a 3,000-year-old myth of a fire-bringing titan who teaches men to forge metal swords and leads them in a rebellion against God. He is punished by being bound on a peak in the Caucasus and tortured by the eagle of this god, who eats the titan's liver every day, only for it to grow back every night. In the Ossetian, Iranian parts of the Caucasus, this titan is still referred to as Amirani, or I am Aryan, with the word Aryan, Irani, meaning noble. More to the point is the fact that in the Amirani myth, the eagle of Zeus is eventually shot through by the arrows of a hero called Batraz, whom the Greeks referred to as the Scythian Hercules. In the Eastern Iranian tradition, this Scythian Hercules comes to be known as Rostam-e Saksi, Rostam the Scythian. With origins in the Mithraic religion of pre-Zoroastrian Iran, he is the single most important hero of the Persian national epic, the Shahnameh of Ferdowsi. To this day, in Georgia, there is a folk tradition of destroying eagles' nests to honor Amirani's defiance of an unjust god. Greek authors would also sometimes use the phrase, the Scythian peaks, when referring to where Prometheus was bound in the Caucasus. Thus, Hercules breaking Prometheus free from his shackles and hunting dead the eagle of Zeus seems, in an older Scythian version of the Prometheus myth, to have been one of the heroic trials of Rostam. The Prometheus myth as a whole appears to be a hybridization of the Amirani myth of Iranian Scythia with the Sumerian myth of Enki, which was adopted into the Iranian world when the Persian Empire incorporated Mesopotamia and even turned Babylon into the capital district of Imperial Iran. Hesiod, who first tells us the story from a hostile Olympian perspective, is from Anatolia, who comes under Iranian rule a little earlier than the Persian conquest and colonization of the eastern parts of Greece. Then, the version of Aeschylus, which frames Prometheus as the first hero of the first tragedy ever written in the West, is composed in the wake of the Persian integration of Ionia, the intellectual and cultural bastion of Greece, into imperial Iran. Aeschylus himself served as a soldier in the Persian Wars, and yet he was able to portray his enemy sympathetically in his tragedy titled The Persians. Aeschylus even draws somewhat of a parallel between his portrayal of Xerxes with his hubris and his portrayal of Prometheus as a hero. It is not at all incidental that the author of the first tragic trilogy in history not only made Prometheus the hero of this trilogy, but also introduced divergent perspectives and a theory of mind into performative art. He invented the stage play with multiple actors as viewed by an audience in an amphitheater, where divergent perspectives on the play are literally introduced by the architectural structure as well. Prior to Aeschylus, such as when Hesiod performed his traditionalist pieces like the Theogony, there was only a single bard, perhaps backed up by a chorus. It is Aeschylus who introduces multiple actors with different perspectives that the audience is invited to identify with and flip between, such as the multiple perspectives offered by the characters of Prometheus, Kratos, Hermes, Zeus, Io, Oceanus, Hercules, and others in the trilogy of Prometheus the Firebringer, Prometheus Bound, and Prometheus Unbound. Later authors throughout the Hellenistic period adopted and adapted the story of Prometheus, from Apollodorus of Athens, 180 to 120 BC, to Zosimos of Panopolis, flourished 300 AD. The latter wrote the first surviving treatises on alchemy, and he associated Prometheus as a patron spirit of alchemy with the teachings of Zoroaster, or Zarathustra. The full breadth and depth of the influence of Prometheus on the nascent scientific culture and technological revolution of the Hellenistic world cannot be known, since 90% of the scientific and literary treatises were lost when Christian mobs attacked and burned institutions such as the Library of Alexandria. It is only in the early modern period that the Prometheus myth reemerges, together with technological science, as a symbol of human self-determination, exploration, and innovation. Many of the great romantic writers of the modern age saw Prometheus as a champion of humanity, adopting his heroic defiance of Zeus and his gift of techne to mankind as a symbol with which to oppose theocratic and monarchical tyranny and to promote intrepid scientific exploration and technological industriousness. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, who is better known for his portrayal of Faust and for contributing to the eventual framing of Western civilization as the Faustian world by Oswald Spengler, actually admitted that amidst his own dark night of the soul he accepted Prometheus as his personal god and savior. In addition to Goethe's Prometheus poem, 1774, there is also one by Lord Byron, 1816, which emphasizes how Prometheus was unjustly punished for his compassionate beneficence toward man, and how he is willing to endure a fate worse than death, a seemingly interminable hell, in steadfast defiance of the Thunderer and the will of inexorable heaven. Lord Byron's close friend, Percy Shelley, wrote the most epic exploration of the Titanic tragedy in his 4-act lyrical drama, Prometheus Unbound, 1820. Shelley's portrayal of Prometheus is the most overtly satanic. He makes it clear enough that Prometheus is none other than Lucifer, and he also incorporates the legend of the destruction of Atlantis, while identifying Atlantis with the biblical pre-flood civilization sired by the fallen angels and destroyed by God, because God wants to keep humanity ignorant and enslaved. The most famous of the modern adaptations of the Prometheus myth is, however, that penned by his wife, Mary Shelley, on a dark and stormy night on Lake Geneva with Percy and Lord Byron. Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, 1818, went on to deeply influence many other Promethean works of science fiction, up to and including Sir Ridley Scott's Prometheus and Alien Covenant.